Again, I'm not ready to say they're going to win the league. I'm not step out there that far, but I think they went from awful the year before he got there, a 1-win team that wasn't even competitive, to 4 wins and being very competitive. I think they can win 8+ games this year.
Welcome to Until Saturday. I'm joined today by Bruce Feldman, Justin Williams. I'm your host, Sam Kahn, and we are going to talk about Big 12 football this season. We're going to do a little bit of a preview. We're calling it our Power Draft preview. If you guys have listened earlier this week on the Until Saturday feed, Chris Vanini, Cameron T. Robinson, Scott Docterman did a similar preview for the Big 10 where we're going to draft teams. We hope you check that out. If you didn't, be sure to check your feed. We'll have more of these to come as we preview the college football season. But we thought it'd be a fun thing to do and a different way to preview the conference rather than the traditional just go team by team and let's talk about all the players. We figured we'd try to draft these teams because I think this is fair to say maybe the deepest conference and at least the most competitive conference top to bottom in the country. But before we get on to that, Bruce, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing well. Good to be on with you guys today. So I'm excited. I'm the only guy here without a beard, so I realized that especially with my hat on backward, I probably look very immature.
Yeah, it's okay. I think we're pro hat backwards guys over here. Justin, are you team hat backward?
Yeah, not cool enough to pull it off, but I would if I could, for sure. Pro backwards hats.
Yeah. So before we get into this preview and into the draft, I wanted to discuss a little bit about the conference as a whole. As we know, the Big 12 has had a lot of change this offseason, really the last 2 seasons, with 4 new teams added before the 2023 season and 4 new teams added before this season. The 4 former Pac-12 teams, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, are now in. I was reading Bill Connolly, who works at ESPN, tweeted this a few weeks ago in talking about the Big 12, said that the Big 10 and SEC schools are going to be rich and miserable, and the Big 12 is going to have all the fun. The conference of close games and chaos is going to be closer and more chaotic than ever in 2024. And it's not really just conjecture. It's actually bore out in the metrics. He did analysis, and in the last 5-6 seasons from 2018 to 2023, the Big 12 had more conference games decided by one score than any other conference in the FBS. 46.5% of Big 12 games from 2018 to 2023 were decided by one score. That's a huge percentage. And all the way down at the bottom of these conferences was the SEC. They had the fewest with 33%. And now that you add Utah, Arizona State, and Colorado to the mix, I think everyone would agree that's going to even make the competition even harder and even closer together between these teams. But I'm going to throw this question at you guys. Justin, I'll start with you. When you look at this conference top to bottom, the Big 12, how many teams in 2024 do you think can realistically win the conference? And if I set the over-under at 5.5 teams, are you taking over or under that many teams that could realistically end up as Big 12 champion this year?
Yeah, I'm going over for sure. We talked. I did that like kind of post-spring power rankings for the Big 12. I had West Virginia 8th in that, and like that's not a slight against West Virginia. I just think it's so crowded at the top. I think West Virginia could absolutely win the Big 12, and so yeah, West Virginia, UCF, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Arizona, Kansas, Utah, Kansas State. I think any of that group right there has a chance to emerge and be the champion. I think there's some tiers within there. I think Utah, Kansas State are kind of at the top, which is what a lot of people have said. I think maybe Kansas, maybe even Arizona are a little bit higher than some of the other ones, but I'm big on Iowa State. I'm high on UCF as a potential dark horse. So I'm not going to be surprised if we get towards the end of, November and we're looking at Oklahoma State versus West Virginia at the top of the Big 12 standings.
Bruce, what do you think? 5.5 teams over under would you take that could realistically win the conference this year?
Oh, I'd be way over on that. We at Big 12 Media Days, Sue and I did a episode of the Audible from Vegas, and we kind of got into this question and we kind of went down the list. And I had 11 teams that I think have a legit chance to win the league. I agree with all the ones Justin had mentioned. West Virginia, 9 wins last year, really good quarterback in Garrett Green. I feel like Neil Brown has it in a good place. the couple of schools that I think I had that I gave kind of the benefit of the doubt for, and I could see it happening. Colorado, I know they won 4 games last year. I do feel like Deion Sanders upgrade the talent there, and as long as Shedeur stays healthy, I think they're a dangerous team. I don't think they'll win the conference, but I could see it where I could see them going on a roll. And then there are 2 Texas schools, TCU. That was the one I was least confident in, to be honest. But Sonny Dykes has his first year was a great year. I don't think they have the roster necessarily to make a run like that, but it wouldn't shock me if it happened. And the other one is Texas Tech. I could see them, the way they've recruited, if they can stay healthy. And then you could say the same about everybody if they can stay healthy. But I think they're a team that has the caliber of athletes to make a run, and I could see them going, getting into the conference title game and winning it, because I do think Joey McGuire has a really good staff, and I do think they've recruited well.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you guys. I think it's over. I definitely would say at least 6. I probably tend more toward 8 teams that could win it. Colorado's an interesting conversation, Bruce. I've talked to people across the scouting world who feel like they did a really terrific job portaling in talent this year, and even better than they did a year before, so that they could make a serious jump and be in that conversation. I don't know that I'm ready to go that far yet, but I can see the path there. But I think we're all in agreement that all 3 of us over that 5.5. And I think that says a lot, because I don't think most conferences, I don't think you could say there would be 6 or 8 or even 9, 10 teams that could have a realistic claim to the conference title at the end. But I think that just underscores how competitive this league is going to be. Let's give you guys a quick explainer of the format we're going to go through. Is, like we said, rather than traditional preview, we're going to snake draft it. We're going to be Bruce, Justin, and myself. We're each going to pick a team. We'll tell you why we chose that team, what we like, what we don't like, all that. Our trusty producer, Camelina, here, I think he has the wheel queued up, so we'll determine the draft order by spinning the wheel. Are we ready, Cam? I got 3 nice little colors for each of our names here. And I think I get the first pick, which I promise it's not rigged. Me and Cam did not discuss this beforehand, so I'll get the first
special
pick.
Investigation unit here.
All right, who's second? Cam, let's spin the wheel.
I guess I should have not shaved for a couple of days. Let's see how it
that
works.
Backward hat, man. It's the backward hat. It got you messed up here. So I'll go first. Justin will go second. Bruce will go third, and then when we get to
laundry day here, and I'm wearing an ACC t-shirt on the Big 12 podcast.
That's right. And so you can't be wearing. I guess our conferences are enemies now, in case you don't know, because the conference commissioners go to media days and start bashing the other leagues. So you wore an ACC shirt, so you've automatically got the last pick.
Are you making a top 3 claim for the ACC there, Bruce, with that pit shirt? Or
no, I'm making a laundry claim because I also have backyard brawl shorts right now.
Oh wow!
So half my wardrobe is stuff I've accrued over 10, 15 years ago.
We're all for backyard brawl over here. By the way, shout out Pitt. They do have a Texas high school quarterback starting for them, Nate Yarnell from Austin Lake Travis. So excited to see how he does this year. Should we put stakes on this, Bruce? I know you and Max had a bet last year with Jeff Sims. Ended up with a steak dinner in Houston at the Taste of Texas. Should we put stakes on this and tally the results here at the end of the year?
I'm up for that. Do you too?
I'm up
sure.
for it.
Jeff Sims now a member of a Big 12 team.
That's right. Arizona State.
We knew that Max was going to lose that bet within 2 weeks.
Yes. Yes. Keaton Slovis ended up getting Bruce a free steak down in Houston in the national championship. So what I'll do is at the end of the year, we'll tally all the points and we'll see who ended up best out of this. You guys ready to do this?
Let's do it.
All right. So as we go through, we'll give you over/under win totals, courtesy of our betting partner, BetMGM. We'll also have strength of schedule ranks and all that good stuff. So round 1, I'm going to get the first pick, and I'm going to go with Kansas State. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about Utah, and I think they're the preseason favorite, and I think rightfully so. But I cannot get over the backfield that Kansas State's going to have with Avery Johnson, DJ Giddens, Dylan Edwards. I think Chris Kleiman's done a great job at Kansas State in his time there. I know there's been a lot of discussion about Utah coming in with the type of style that they play, the physical beat you up style of ball that they play, and help them be really successful in Pac-12 conference. Well, guess what? Kansas State's been doing that in the Big 12. And I think now that the power vacuum has opened with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, Kansas State has already won a Big 12 title in recent years. I think Avery Johnson's ready to break out. I like Bruce. I know you talked to him a little bit. Matt Wells, really high on Avery Johnson. Matt coached Jordan Love over at Utah State. I think seems like there's a lot of similarities in terms of the ceiling for Avery Johnson there. And I just think K-State's got a chance really to make a statement this year in the first year of the Big 12. So they'll be my number one pick. But Bruce, I'd love to hear from you a little bit on your perspective, because you had been talking to Matt Wells, former Texas Tech coach, former Utah State coach, and what they think about Avery Johnson over there.
Yeah, Avery's blazing fast. I mean, he's also put on, when I talked to him in Vegas, he's put on over 20 pounds. He's 195 pounds. He was super skinny last year, in the bowl game when he was the MVP of the bowl game. But the biggest thing Matt Wells had told me, and as you said, he developed Jordan at Utah State, was the work ethic and the things that you hear about him from Chris Kleiman, and I also talked to Justin Hoover, who's been the private quarterback coach with him, and Hoover's had a bunch of NFL guys he's worked with. He's a much better passer than I think people have given him credit for, because they just know how fast he is, but also the work ethic. Chris Kleiman's talking about it factor, and the most competitive guy he's had since Easton Stick, who won, I think, 4 national titles for him at North Dakota State. All those things, the other thing I would add on why I would kind of be bullish on K-State, why I like your pick, is if you look at the preseason rankings in the conference, the top 5 teams that are there, you had Utah, they don't play Utah. And then the other teams that are in there, they all get them to come to Manhattan. So it sets up really well for them. Good pick, Sam.
Thank you. Justin, you are up with the second pick of the Big 12 Power Draft. Who are you taking?
I would have taken Kansas State first. They were my pick, but I am going to go Utah here at number 2. I do have some trepidation. It's basically a new team in the sense that Cam Rising didn't play at all last year. They lost Micah Bernard, their running back, for most of the year. Brant Keithy. Am I saying that right, Bruce?
Yep. Keithy, correct.
Keithy, the tight end, missed all of last year. These are guys who are like what would have been all Pac-12 performers, but they haven't been on the field in a long time. So I am, however, I'm giving Kyle Whittingham the benefit of the doubt. I think he and Utah have earned the sense that until they show they come out and fall on their face, like I'm not going to assume that's going to happen. Even with all those injuries last year, they went 5-4 in a really good Pac-12, had 8 wins overall. So if you're getting Cam Rising back healthy, which by all accounts we are, if you're getting some of those other guys back healthy, they added Dorian Singer, wide receiver, in the transfer portal. They're always solid on defense. And you mentioned this, Sam, and I talked to Kyle Whittingham about this earlier this offseason. They come in like Big 12 ready. They were a little bit of a mismatch in what the Pac-12 had become in terms of air it out, really quarterback heavy. Well, all of a sudden the Big 12 is like ground and pound, running back heavy. Kind of defenses are adjusting and evolving with that. Utah is going to come in and totally get the pace and style of play that the Big 12 has kind of turned into. And so until we see Kyle Whittingham and Utah start to fall off, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and pick him with my second choice here.
Bruce, you thoughts on Utah? You've seen them quite a bit. What do you think on?
Yeah, I mean, they're the team as a sideline reporter. They're the team that you notice and like, wow, when you see them physically, TV doesn't do them justice because of their physicality. They're big. They're always physical. I mean, Kyle Whittingham, he kind of exudes that, and his team reflects it. Rising when he's healthy is really, really good. They're always good on defense. Now they lost some really good guys, 2 big time safeties. Jonah Ellis was really, disruptive edge guy. So, but they're, they have really good linebackers, and I think they're a talented team. Dorian Singer was fantastic for Arizona a couple of years ago, and he was less of a factor at USC. he's not the fastest receiver in the world, but he has really good ball skills. And I think with him and Keithy, again, Keithy was hurt most of last year too. Those guys are healthy. They're, I feel like it's like one, having the second pick in this is good, but I just feel like there's like 5 teams that are very close. And it wouldn't at all surprise me if Utah was the class of the conference, given what they've been. It's just a matter of, can they stay healthy?
And lucky for you, because you're last in the first round, you will get back-to-back picks in our snake draft. So you'll get the end of round 1, top round 2. So you're actually in a really good spot here, considering how deep the conference is at the top. So Bruce, third pick, Big 12 Power Draft. Who you got?
I'm going to go with Oklahoma State here. Obviously, Mike Gundy's won a lot of football games there. Ollie Gordon's a dynamic running back. They have an extremely experienced offensive linebacker. I like Alan Bowman. Alan is probably older than Justin, and he's a really good leader. He obviously was a prolific quarterback at Texas Tech. Went to Michigan. He's super mature. They have good receivers. Brendan Presley is a dynamic, smaller receiver. I think they have really good chemistry. There's a lot to like. You have, some edge guys who can get after the quarterback, Colin Oliver, obviously. For me, the only thing I a little hesitant on them is because on paper they make a lot of sense because all the experience on offense, but there's always been that like clunker year that comes out of nowhere. It feels a little like Virginia Tech used to be, where when you don't expect them to be very good, they're really good. And then when you kind of do, they maybe disappoint and dip back a little bit. But for the third spot, I feel pretty good about them.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say this. I thought last year was the best coaching job Mike Gundy's done since he's been there. It was really impressive to see where they started early in the year and how they evolved and adapted to their personnel over the course of the season, really reinvented themselves and turned from a team that struggled in the non-conference to one that played for a Big 12 championship. And I think that's a testament to Gundy's acumen and his adaptability and being able to, he's not the same coach. This is not the same Oklahoma State that we saw 10 years ago that was throwing it all over the yard. This is a different team that can be physical, that can win at the line of scrimmage and win multitude of ways. And obviously they rode Ollie Gordon quite a bit last year. And him being back, I think, is so huge. I do like a lot of their defensive personnel. I think Alan Bowman, for me, is the big question mark. But considering how much they bring back, the returning production, they're near the top of the country in returning production with all those starters back. I think the 4th, according to SP Plus, 77% returning production. I think they're absolutely, to me, I think all 3 teams we just listed, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Utah, I think they're in a tier on their own as Big 12 title contenders. And I think Oklahoma State's absolutely in that group. Bruce, let's go to your next pick to start round 2. Who is your pick for the 4th team in the Big 12 Power Draft?
I went back and forth as we're, talking for the first couple of minutes. I'm going with the Cyclones. I think Matt Trumbull's a really good coach. They finished last year strong. Remember, they had all sorts of distractions last year. The gambling investigation heading into that was involved in Iowa, football in the state. And that was in the beginning of the year. And then you had a really young team. Rocco Becht, I know they love him. I talked to Matt Campbell a lot about this, this group. And I think he is going to emerge as one of the best quarterbacks in college football. They have really good skill talent, good running back, a bunch of good receivers. I think this is a team that can win 9 games, can win maybe even 10 games. They are, I would argue that this may be the most talented team he's had there. And obviously they had a team, a few years ago that finished 9th in the country. It's young, but I think they've gotten a lot of experience. I think they're trending in the right direction. Some of the other teams I considered, I was like, ooh, I like them, but there's a little more hesitation on durability issues. Whereas this team, I feel like they're a big physical team, and I think they're set up well, and they're kind of floating under the radar a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of that has to do with they're not considered a high ceiling program. They're not a program that we consider in the playoff discussion. And so they've kind of lied in the weeds there a little bit, but they've been really solid over time. And they too very strong returning production, second in the country, 85% coming into this year. And you mentioned the quarterback situation. It's going to be interesting to see how they progress. Justin, you are up next with the 5th pick in the Big 12 Power Draft. Who you got?
I went back and forth here too. Considered Arizona, who I think has some really good top end talent, but I'm going Kansas. This is purely like a Jalen Daniels stays healthy pick right here, which I love watching Jalen Daniels, so I hope that happens. I think a lot of college football fans are with me there. He hasn't shown an ability to do that over the course of his career. I certainly hope that's the case this season, because I do think if he stays healthy, I think we're talking about like a fringe Heisman candidate. And I think that is going to be the delta of whether or not Kansas can win a Big 12 championship. Jason Bean, the backup, who always seemed to like come in and keep them in games the past couple of years, he's gone. But if Jalen Daniels stays healthy, they have, to me, all the other pieces. We know what Lance Leipold can do. Devin Neal, the running back, is fantastic. I think in a conference with Ollie Gordon and RJ Harvey, who's really good. And again, some DJ Giddens we talked about, Dylan Edwards at Kansas State. Like, he might be another one that goes under the radar. Taj Brooks, those guys kind of get mentioned first, and it feels like Devin Neal might get and forget about a little bit. And then they have Daniel Highshaw Jr., who I think was also a Doak Walker like preseason candidate. They had 2 guys on that preseason list at running back. I think the offense is going to be really solid. They have some pieces on defense. Kobe Bryant, an all-conference type cornerback, potential All-American. I think everything is there for them. They have a solid offensive line. To me, it's just, can Jalen Daniels stay healthy? And then so by picking them 5th here, this is me betting that he at least plays 9 or 10 games this season, and the right 9 or 10 games. And if that's the case, I think they're going to be in good shape.
Yeah, I thought losing Andy Cole and Nick at OC, I thought was tough, but I thought they did about as good a job as you could in filling that void with Jeff Grimes. I was a big fan of what he did at Baylor, and the style of offense that he runs with the amount of misdirection, I think is going to fit well with what Kansas was already doing from a personnel standpoint. Bruce, I know you're a little bit familiar with them and their scheme. What do you think about Grimes and the fit at Kansas?
I think it is a good fit. One of the things that just knowing some of the coaches who are at KU that they rave about when it comes to Daniels is how smart he is, how good a decision maker he is. I think he's a pretty special player. And as Justin said, you have a big time running back. The receivers and those guys are back look fantastic in the bowl game. I mean, there's a team with a lot of firepower, and this is his most talented team there. It's, again, the wild card question, and it's, you could say this with everybody. It's like, oh, if their quarterback can stay healthy, it's just Jalen hadn't been able to finish a year, and I think that's been the one sticking piece here. But if he's able to be the starter in every game, I mean, they're as good as anybody in the league, and I think they could be a problem for teams. Lance Leipold obviously knows what he's doing when it comes to getting in playoffs and everything else, given his track record of winning national titles.
Yeah, I agree. I think this question of health. If Jalen Daniels is healthy, then I think Kansas is in really good shape. All right, 6th pick here in the Big 12 Power Draft. I'm up next, and I am going to take Arizona, number 21 team in the preseason coaches poll. By the way, every ranked team in the preseason coaches poll is now off the board. Arizona comes in at 21, Utah 13, Kansas State 17, Oklahoma State 18, and Kansas, who Justin just picked, 24th. So 5 ranked teams in the Big 12. But I'm going with the Wildcats for 2 reasons. Noah Fafita and Tetairoa McMillan. Those 2 guys, I think being able to keep them this offseason was huge for Brent Brennan and the Arizona team. Those 2, I think, are such big weapons. They also were able to hold on to Cario Davis in the secondary. So despite losing a really good coach, Jed Fish, who went to Washington, thought they did a really good job of retaining the personnel. I think they have a chance to be really explosive. Bruce, what are your thoughts on the Wildcats?
They're really talented. I mean, you said it. Like, from everything I've heard out of Tucson, Noah Fafita was looking at following Jed Fish to Seattle, and Tetairoa wanted to stay. He's a phenomenal receiver. I mean, he's as good as there is in college football. Unreal ball skills. I mean, they do have to replace Jonah Coleman, who is a really physical running back. He did go up to UW, but some big time offensive linemen led by Jonah Savanaya. Tacario Davis, as you said, is a 6'3", 6'4" cornerback. He's a pretty special talent. They're they're a legit top 25 team. And because of the conference that Noah plays with back there, I mean, he has so much trust in his guy. I mean, he and T-Mac were known each other since 8th grade. And you can see that chemistry. It's going to be a little bit different offense. Obviously, I know, Sam, you were around Dino Babers back in the day. Now he's the OC. There'll be a lot of elements of the old Arizona offense, but I think you'll see some of the wrinkles of what Dino Babers was doing at Syracuse. And obviously the offshoots of that are from the, his time around Art Briles and the Baylor system. So they're going to be explosive. They're another one that I could see somebody picking them as the preseason number 1. I mean, because they're that dangerous. Yeah,
Justin, you mentioned, Bruce, the Dino Babers. I thought Dino was a nice, smart hire at OC for them. Dwayne Aquino over as DC. Really good staff over there. But Justin, what do you think about Arizona's chance to actually contend for the title here?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about all the top end talent that they have, and I think that's key. For as much as they did lose a lot of it going to Washington, we talked about some of the big names that they kept, and I think that's a credit to Brennan and kind of the culture there at Arizona. Bruce mentioned losing Coleman, the running back. They did bring in JCM, Jarrett Krosky Merritt, who was a 1,000-yard rusher at New Mexico. I think that was probably the biggest portal addition that Brennan brought in this season. I think he can kind of be a plug and play guy in the backfield to replace what they lost. So it will be interesting to see how they do on defense, even though they kept Davis and some big pieces. I think that's where the biggest question marks are. But yeah, I'm with you guys that they should be good on offense.
All right, next up, 7th pick. We're in the 3rd round. I will kick off this round, and I think I'm going to disappoint Justin a little bit because I'm going to take West Virginia. I know you mentioned them at the top that you thought this is a team that has potential to win the conference. I would agree. I do think they have that potential with Garrett Green back. They got a loaded backfield. CJ Donaldson and Jaheim White both back. Neil Brown did a terrific job last year coaching his way off the hot seat. And I just, they're winning 9 games last year, considering being picked to the preseason, the last in the preseason poll in the Big 12. You look at them this year, they're kind of laying in the middle there in the preseason poll. They came in 7th behind those 16 we've already mentioned. They're going 7th in ours. I do feel like people are sleeping on them. Justin, I assume you would agree a little bit that people are sleeping on West Virginia.
Yeah, I think so. I'm working on a piece. I went out to Morgantown a couple weeks ago and talked to Neil Brown. He, I think what everyone remembers last year is he went to the podium at Big 12 Media Days when they were picked last and was like, we're not going to finish last. And kind of the thing that he's talking about this offseason, he was right. The thing we're talking about this offseason is he's basically saying, my guys are underrated. And Garrett Green, the quarterback, is kind of the top example that he's pointed to. His completion percentage wasn't great last year. Their receivers weren't great last year either. They brought in Bray from Oklahoma State. They've added some pieces that I think can help them. But he's a good runner, Garrett Green is, and they have that 2-headed monster at running back. I think they're just going to be, going into Morgantown has never really been an easy place to play, but I think they're that classic team that you see on the schedule, and no matter what their record is, that they're going to be a pain to play, and it feels like they're going to have some games late in the season, whether they're in contention for a title game or whether they're knocking somebody else out. Like, West Virginia is going to be a force in the conference this season, I think.
Yeah, Garrett Green is one of those guys that I like to say he's just got juice. When you watch him, whatever the stats say, when you watch him, he's got a certain competitiveness to him that I really like. I saw them when they came down to Houston last year. They lost a game on a Hail Mary at the end. This game they should have won, but really impressed with watching him. Bruce, your thoughts on the Mountaineers and what Neil Brown's done so far there?
Yeah, he's done a really good job of getting them off, I feel like, the hot seat in himself. And I'm a big fan of Garrett Green. I mean, he was a guy on my freaks list. I think he's one of the best running quarterbacks. He's got some of the baseball player kind of, I don't say tendencies, but you can see where he just kind of slings the ball around and he makes plays. CJ Donaldson's a horse in the backfield. And I think they do a really good job of kind of accentuating what they do well. 9 wins, and I think they have some momentum to build off of. They're definitely one of those teams that I think can win the league, especially if Green builds off of what he did last year. I mean, he was a guy who was committed to Troy at one point, and they liked him over there. He gets at West Virginia. Once he really got the opportunity to be that guy, I feel like he's flourished. And we have them, my crew at, Big Noon, we have them week 1. Penn State's coming in there. Obviously, Penn State's still a very talented team. but that's a tough place to play. And they're going, wouldn't be shocked if they pulled an upset, right? Because they have an experienced quarterback who's a playmaker in a very hostile environment, and they're going to be primed to try to take down Penn State.
The thing with West Virginia, the middle of their schedule is really tough. You mentioned, obviously, they open with Penn State. They have at Pitt, Kansas, Oklahoma, at Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, at Arizona, all there right in the middle of the season. If they can weather that storm, it does let up a little bit towards the end, but that 6-game stretch right in the middle is rough.
11 games against power conference opponents. That's definitely got to be one of the more challenging schedules, certainly in the Big 12, probably in the country. Justin, I think I have a feeling where you're going here on pick number 8 with round 3, but let's see if you pick who I think you're going to pick in the Big 12 Power Draft.
I'm going with the Gus Bus and the UCF, the Knights. They're one that I would have. You're right. I'm big on West Virginia, but that was another spot where I was going back and forth depending on who you took of who I kind of wanted to fall for me. A little bit similar to Arizona. I don't think they're quite as talented, but I think they're going to be really good on offense. I like the KJ Jefferson addition. We talked about him on the X Factors Big 12 pod. That's one that if anyone can kind of get the best out of him in this last season as a college quarterback, I like what Gus Malzahn has done with players like him in the past. I think he's a good fit for that UCF offense. Outside of, I know we've talked a lot about running backs, and there's a lot of really good ones in this conference. Outside of maybe Ohio State, I think you could argue that UCF has the best running back room in the country. RJ Harvey's electric. They brought in Penny Boone, the transfer out of the MAC, who was a 1,000-yard rusher. And then their third string running back is Miles Montgomery, who was at Cincinnati, is a Florida kid, really talented. I think when he transferred there, he thought he was going to be the number 2 guy behind RJ Harvey. It was before they brought in Penny Boone. But with all the talent that KJ Jefferson has, they have Kobe Hudson at receiver. That kind of 3-headed monster in the backfield, I think, could make them really, really lethal on offense with the style of play that they have under Gus Malzahn. The question is defensively. They really kind of faded at the end of some games last year that, their first year making the jump from the G5 to the Big 12. I think it showed up in a lot of fourth quarters. They've added some interesting pieces like Deshaun Pace, another Cincinnati guy who's kind of streaky, like hit or miss at times, but can make some game breaking plays. If they can figure out defensively how to just keep in games and keep it close on the scoreboard, I think they have enough offensive firepower that they can be a team that can really make a run at a Big 12 title game.
The over under on their win total is actually higher at 7.5 than West Virginia's 6.5, but a lot less returning production. They're 101st in the country as opposed to West Virginia's 24th. So that's where your difference is. But a lot of new portal additions, so that I think that's going to help them. Bruce, are you high on Gus and what they're building at UCF and they're early going to the Big 12?
I am, because he's good in the run game. And, I remember had a chance to be around KJ Jefferson when he was out here training in San Diego last year. And unless you see him in person, I don't think you realize just how big of a man he is. Like, he's the biggest 6'3", 247-pound guy I've ever seen. He's 77. He's just a huge guy who looks like a guy who'd be playing offensive line in like an FCS program or something. Or defensive line. He's just a big dude. And I think that's the kind of guy that is really dangerous in what Gus Malzahn does in the run game. And Penny Boone is another huge guy. I remember when he was at Maryland 2 years ago. I remember, doing some of their games where you'd see him. He was kind of more the short yardage back. Harvey's dynamic. It's like a recipe for them to, and they have a lot of speed. I think that's the one, like you guys have been around the Big 12. I think when UCF went in the conference, that was the thing that some coaches would talk about. Like, there's a lot of speed in this program. And so you have that, plus you have kind of the scheme that fits what he has with this quarterback. I think they could have a pretty lethal combination. I would not want to play this team if it was, if you're a Big 12 team, you look up and you got UCF, especially after you just had like somebody who, whether it's Iowa State or you just had a team like Utah that's really physical, even like a BYU. No one's talking about them as a a top 25 team, but they have some big dudes. And if you're coming off of that, and all of a sudden you got this group coming at you, I think it's a tall order.
I think you hit on it, the speed. I remember watching them in games last year in the Big 12, and they did not look overmatched. If anything, they looked really impressive physically. And even at the line of scrimmage, I thought that they had really good speed up front and size up front. I think Gus has done a tremendous job recruiting to a power conference level roster here and make it. They were clearly, in my opinion, the most ready of those 4 teams that came in last year. All right, this is where it's going to get interesting. We're at pick number 9. We're at the end of round 3. This is where we get into those teams that I think have some really high upside, but have some question marks. Bruce, you're up next. Who you take in 9th in the Big 12 Power Draft?
I feel good about my position right here. I have 2 teams that, to me, are jumping out to me. One is Colorado. Mentioned them before. Deion needed to upgrade the guys in the trenches badly, and I think he really did a good job of getting some prime beef in there. Guys who played on the offense line in games have a lot of experience now. Now that we need to see if they can be cohesive. The other thing I really like about what they have is they have some good pass rushers they brought in. Obviously, we know Travis Hunter is a big time 2-way talent. Robert Livingston, if people don't know about him, he's the new defensive coordinator. I've heard a lot of really good things about him from people inside football. He came from the Cincinnati Bengals, was there a long time under Lou Anarumo. I think we've seen this track record work well in college football recently. And what I mean by that is, I talked to Jed Fish at Washington about a month ago. He was talking about when he was looking for a new defensive coordinator, he had noticed the success rate of guys who had just come from the NFL into college. And he pointed to Al Golden, who, by the way, was with Livingston with the Bengals. They're close. And then he goes to Notre Dame as a top 10 defense. Mike McDonald goes from the Ravens and goes to Michigan, has an elite defense. Then he goes back to the NFL, and Jesse Minter makes that move also from the Ravens, and they end up winning a national title. And the other one was Danton Lynn, had never been a defensive coordinator, comes from the NFL, goes to UCLA, and has a top 10 defense. I'm not saying Robert Livingston is going to have a top 10 defense in Colorado, but I think they will be much improved on that side of the ball. And I think that they will be able to do a much better job of protecting Shedeur, because, he's a really good player. It's just really hard to keep, he wore down at the end of the year. We had a game when I was in studio. It was a Friday night game against Washington State, and they were just pummeling him. It was a cold, ugly night. I think Deion was sick at that point. He looked miserable there, and they didn't hold up. But I think that, again, I'm not ready to say they're going to win the league. I'm not step out there that far, but I think they went from awful the year before he got there, a 1-win team that wasn't even competitive, to 4 wins and being very competitive. I think they can win 8+ games this year. The schedule is not easy. They have 2 really tricky games right out of the gate. You play North Dakota State. There's no joy in playing a powerful team from an FCS program because you don't get much credit if you beat them. And they got Nebraska, who they beat last year. And I think Nebraska is going to be much improved. I know they just lost their starting left tackle, but I do think Matt Rule is going to be a lot better in year 2. Having said all that, I like Colorado. I think they're a potentially very good team, especially if they get on a roll.
Bruce, I felt like last year when Deion got hired and was coming in, that you were someone that was kind of like, don't underestimate this guy. And before anyone had really seen him, and even before all the hype had started, I felt like you were talking about he has a lot of respect in football circles and coaching circles. Is that what you see? Maybe I get all the attention and the flash that's going to follow him, but the Livingston hire, some of the moves they made in the portal, do you think that speaks to maybe some of that football coaching ability that people have underestimated from him that he's showing here this first full off season that he had?
Yeah. He's much more dialed in the pro football world than I think a lot of us in the media probably. I think there's a difference between, it rubs a lot of folks around college football wrong about all the access that goes on, where it's everything's on camera, and there's a lot of stuff that happens that shows up on streaming shows and everything else, and they feel like it's more style than substance. There's definitely a lot of style there, but I do think there's a lot of substance too. I remember being at one of their practices on a Friday. It was before they played Nebraska, and he was way more engaged in terms of really hands-on with the players. And we're talking about one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the game. And I think some of that stuff tends to get lost because I think, a lot of us get kind of sucked into some of the other stuff, and there's a lot of chatter around the program, and I think there's a lot of rumors and like stuff that's like kind of, I think people don't know what to believe, to be honest. And so a lot of times you hear it, and it's not to say everything that comes out of there is like exactly how Nick Saban would do it, or exactly how, the guys who typically win in college football would do it. But that team got way better than what it used to be. I go back to how bad they were. It's hard to flip things in 1 year. And I think the portal has helped. And I do think some of the guys they brought in now, I mean, in 2023, it felt like they were a really good 7-on-7 team, but they were trying to play a football game. And eventually that became the Now I feel like they have the pieces at least to match up. And I'm interested to see what year 2 is going to look like for them.
Yeah, I think the big question for me is, are they going to be better up front? You mentioned Shedeur was worn down at the end of last year.
They can't be any worse. They cannot be
right.
any worse.
Right, exactly. They signed Jordan Seaton, the 5-star up front. They brought in Justin Mayers from UTEP, Tyler Johnson from Houston, Zach Owens from Clemson, 5,886 snaps of experience in the portal just on the offensive line they brought in per PFF. So if they're better up front, I don't know how portal in a line works, but if they can make it work, I think you're right. I think they have 8+ win potential for sure. All right, you got the next pick also, Bruce, number 10. So you got Colorado. Who's your next pick in the Big 12 Power Draft?
Somewhere, Max Olson is smiling because we're about to talk about Texas Tech and Joey McGuire. So, look, Baron Morton's shoulder is 100%. He was banged up last year, and I feel like that would have been a little bit of an issue with the Red Raiders. Tyler Shuck, very talented. Everybody thought he was talented. He just couldn't, was unable to really stay healthy. I think Baron Morton has really good receivers. We talk about, Micah Hudson, 5-star freshman, comes in there. That's a huge get for them. I also think you add Josh Kelly, Caleb Douglas. I mean, when we were talking a little bit ago about the big time running backs in this league, Taj Brooks is up there. I think I have a poker chip with his face on it somewhere in this house. I think this is a good team. They've recruited really well. It's one of those things where I think Joey McGuire's done a good job of turning them into a very competitive team, where they can go to bowls consistently. It's not where it was when Leach was there, certainly, but it was really turbulent in that stretch from, Tuberville and then Cliff and then, the short run, before with
Matt Wells.
Matt Wells. I was going to call him Matt Kelly, Matt Wells. But what happened, I think, in the interim of that, and Justin, you've written a lot of great stuff about this, is this program has a huge amount of money that has come into it and massive upgrades and resources because of, some old Texas Tech offensive linemen who've turned into billionaires. And now all of a sudden, I feel like the upside of this program, we're just starting to get into it now, I think, where it goes. And maybe this, again, a lot of it's going to come back to how well can Baron Morton play. But I think they have, really good coaching staff. Kitley on offense is a very creative mind. Tim DeRuyter is a great defensive coordinator. I think there's a lot of good things that are going on in Lubbock right now.
Justin, you've been down to Lubbock on the Cody Campbell experience. What do you? I know we were very high on them last year, and they were a little bit underwhelming, a little bit disappointed. They lost that opener to Wyoming. Started slow out of the gate, but they finished strong. I'm still optimistic about them. I'm not ready to say, hey, dark horse to win the Big 12. I do think if they're good up front, I think it's a potential to be a top 15 offense with the talent that they've got. Brian Mike Hudson, if Morton can stay healthy, they're good up front. You mentioned Taj Brooks, who's one of the best backs out there. What do you think about Tech and where they're going to ultimately land at the end of the day this year?
Yeah, they're spreading that love to softball all of a sudden too, which is interesting. No, I'm with you. It's hard not to like Joey McGuire. It's hard not to like kind of his approach since he's gotten that job and the way he's approaching roster building and recruiting the state of Texas and all that kind of stuff. He's an easy guy that, you've heard him talk, Sam. When you listen to him, like he's got that kind of fire and brimstone revival preacher status. And so I like what he's doing down there. Taj Brooks is a workhorse. Baron Morton is the question. They've had so much injury, whether it was Tyler Shook a year ago who was a starter and he got injured, and then Baron Morton got injured. It sounds like Morton's healthy. I know he had some shoulder injuries earlier in the year, but there's a couple teams in this conference, one of them that I'm probably about to pick next, where if the quarterback, Kansas too with Jalen Daniels, if the quarterback can stay healthy and play to their potential, then things will probably work out for them. And, maybe on a lesser scale than somebody like Jalen Daniels, I just think you need Baron Morton to stay healthy and play a full season to help Texas Tech hit their ceiling.
On that note, one thing that I thought was shrewd by Joey McGuire and the staff was bringing in an experienced quarterback in the portal. They brought in Cameron Brown from West Georgia. I thought he impressed them in the spring, and he won the backup job basically in the spring. And so Morton is the guy. But if Morton goes down, I think they feel better about where they are if they have to go down the depth chart a little bit. So that'll be interesting to see if they need to go to him and how he impacts the offense. I think he'll still have a role. And a name I'll give you guys to keep an eye on, one of the portal additions they made this offseason, to Braylon Carroll, defensive tackle, had a really good career at Rice. He's going to help. Texas Tech lost a couple guys up front. I think Braylon Carroll is going to be a good one to kind of plug the gap there for them in the interim. Justin, you're up next, 11th pick, round 4. Who you got?
I'm going TCU. I know Bruce talked about them earlier. Obviously they're just now, a little over a season removed from playing in the national title game. It feels like they got totally overlooked and forgotten since then because of some of the struggles they had last year. I'm not totally sure what to make of them. I like Josh Hoover, the quarterback, another kind of young up and comer in this conference. Didn't establish himself maybe as much as like Rocco Beck did at Iowa State last year, but people down in Fort Worth love him. He has kind of all the tools and potential you want. I'm curious to see what he looks like when it's his job this season. And then they have some good pieces around him. Savion Williams, the wide receivers, a really talented outside guy. I love JP Richardson, former Oklahoma State transfer, as kind of a slot possession receiver. I think still have Trey Sanders at running back. Like, they have some good offensive pieces. Brought in Bless Harris on the offensive line. And really what I like the most is what they did defensively in the portal. They did lose Dominic Williams after the spring window, which really hurt, but kept Caleb Fox, brought in Devin Deal, and was it Caleb Elam's
Johnny Hodges, man.
Johnny Hodges, Asafu Mensah. Like, they have kind of these really flexible, versatile pieces, I feel like, especially in that front seven. But just because of they had some expectations going into last year and fell off, and everyone kind of forgot about them. I'm just totally not sure what to make of them. So I think it's fair that they're kind of in this 11th spot in the conference in terms of one of us taking them. I think there's like a high ceiling, probably low floor potential with this team. And if everything hits right, then I'm kind of with you guys. I don't know if they can compete necessarily for a conference championship, but I think they have the talent to make some noise.
When you go watch them play or you go watch them practice, they look good. I'll tell you that. They still look physically like similar to the team that they look like in 2022 when they made that run. It's just, I don't think the experience is there. I don't think the chemistry is quite there like it was in 2022. That just takes time to build. And I think Sonny Dykes will tell you, I visited with him this offseason. He'll tell you firsthand, they probably underestimated how difficult it was going to be to carry over the culture from 2022 to 2023, considering how many guys they lost. So
also, I would argue being out here, I've been to the Chargers a few times, and Max Duggan's there. Max Duggan turned out to have a great season because he was such a running threat, and you had a great running back with him. Again, I'm not saying Trey Sanders, I feel like TCU has almost always, maybe not LaDainian Tomlinson caliber, obviously, but like they've had some pretty talented running backs. But I feel like that combination, and also there was something to be said for going from GP with Gary Patterson's personality and kind of I don't even know how to describe it in a non-positive way, but just kind of like you're under his thumb to all of a sudden now you got Sonny Dykes and they're cut loose a little bit. And it's a great shift for them to come out of it. Now it's tricky when you go from like, now it's year 3, and I'm not saying the program is going to backslide, but I think it's in some ways it's a great thing when you go from that to this, and then all of a sudden now it's like this is all Sonny's, the remnants of it. They're not kind of off the, hey, we just got turned loose, now we can go after people. Now it's like they've kind of been that way for a little bit. So I'm fascinated to see if they can bounce back closer to what they were like, as opposed to what it felt like last year.
In terms of long term, we talked about this with Texas Tech too, but it feels like, especially now with Texas and Oklahoma gone, like TCU and Texas Tech, I think, have a shot to be at the top of that conference in terms of recruiting, whether it's at a high school with all the talent, in the state there, or just in the portal. I thought TCU did a really good job out of the portal, kind of adding some versatile depth pieces this year. Whether that shows up right away or whether it takes a couple years, you could say the same thing about, Joey McGuire and Texas Tech. But I think those two teams have a chance to kind of be the most talented teams in the Big 12. Maybe not the same gap that Texas and Oklahoma had, but maybe a little bit of a differentiator than some of the other programs.
Yeah, I'm also curious to see Andy Avalos' impact. That I've heard a lot of good things about his presence in the building so far. Defense apparently has really been getting after it, which is much needed. They were really bad defensively at the end of last year. But yeah, I think it's gonna be interesting to see. By the way, I'm back. My 9-year-old son just brought me a piece of his braces that apparently broke off. So that's gonna be a fun, maybe potentially pricey trip to the dentist. We're about
Sam really needs a steak dinner now.
Yeah, I need to win this. So these next couple of picks are going to be really important for me here. So I'm up number 12 pick. We're deep into the weeds here, boys. Round 4 coming up, and I think I'm going to give you guys a pick that may surprise you a little bit, considering how bad they were last year. I'm going to go with Baylor at number 12. 5.5 over under win total. Dave Aranda goes into the year on the hot seat, but I don't think that this team is far off from being competitive in the league. Now, we know, of course, in 2021 they won the conference. They've not been good since then. 9-16 in the next 2 years after that Big 12 title run, Sugar Bowl win. They needed to change in a big way, and I think they have made some good changes. Dave Aranda is now essentially the defensive coordinator. He's going back to his roots, going to call the defense, going to be heavily involved. I went over there in the spring. He's coaching the linebackers. He's really in there on a day-to-day basis as opposed to being the CEO type. Brought in Jake Spavital to call the offense. I think Spav has proven himself as an offensive coordinator. I think him and Taquan Finn, the quarterback transfer they took from Toledo, I think a really appealing combo. Ashton Hawkins, the receiver, the transfer they got from Texas State. So I look at the talent on this team, and I think they have a chance to be pretty good. I think it just, to me, they were so young last year. They were the youngest team in the Big 12. And with so many of those guys back, they did better in the portal this year. They're paying players now, as I'm sure you guys saw on Twitter.
Love the shirt.
Coaches wearing T-shirts on at practice saying we pay players. And I know that may be a revelation because everybody might say, well, everybody's paying players. Baylor really wasn't doing it at the level that everybody else was because Aranda really wasn't comfortable with it. They were doing something very minimal where everybody kind of got the same thing. They kind of unlocked that this year and got away from that. They've gotten very much into the game and been aggressive. Bruce, you were there at Big 12 Media Days. I think that's where he said they asked how we're doing recruiting. Well, because we're paying players. What is your read on Aranda and how ready he is for this pressure pack season that essentially his job's on the line?
Yeah, I'm interested to see how it goes with, Jake's a really good offensive coordinator. He had some, did really well at Cal when he was with Sonny Dykes, and he had Davis Webb, who obviously was a transfer quarterback. I know Daquan Finn is a really explosive athlete and a different kind of running threat than, Jake has had some, obviously he had Johnny Manziel, and we know how gifted and mercurial he was. But I'm interested to see, because this is a team that still has a lot of speed. Monterey Baldwin's, a very dynamic, smaller skill guy. And I think that what's tricky for them is there's just been so many like stops and starts from the time from the time Aranda's got there. First it was Larry Fedora and George Munoz and kind of what they were trying to do. It felt like a little bit of some version of like what was working at LSU, but they had 3, first round skill guys in Joe Burrow. And that's certainly not what anything close to what Baylor had running it. And then there was certainly a bounce back success early on. We were talking about Jeff Grimes before they had it going, and then all of a sudden they didn't. And I remember doing one of the Baylor games for Fox, and you just felt like it was a little rudderless on the offensive side on the sideline. And I don't think I'm not necessarily I'm talking about Grimes. I'm talking about just in terms of, I think Blake Shapen was in there, and I think there was it just didn't seem like it was a great fit for everybody there. I think you have an experienced quarterback in Finn now, and you have an offensive coordinator who knows how to move the football. And again, I'm most interested to see what Dave does on the defensive side of the ball now that he's way more got his hands on it, because he's brilliant. And this is a conference where I'm not saying there's not some other good defensive minds, but it's traditionally been known for offense. And so, what does it look like with Dave running the show? Does it look like those Wisconsin defenses back, when he was there? Does it look like Utah State? Does it look like some of the places where he's been really good? We'll see.
Justin, you were high on Baylor last year. Obviously, it all fell apart, and let's be frank, they were really bad last year. They got alarmingly bad, as in losing conference games by double digits. I think 5 conference games they lost by an average of 25 points, something to that effect. It got really bad. What is your sense for how big a climb does Baylor have to get out of this hole?
Yeah, the 2 biggest things that I'm intrigued by this year is Aranda kind of getting back to calling the plays defensively. I think that could be important, and bringing in Finn. Like, I know Toledo's a different level, but he's a really dynamic dual threat quarterback, and I think he's a player that in this league, if he can kind of come in and translate to the talent difference, he could be a huge differentiator for them. I think they were really struggling between the kind of Blake Shapen, Sawyer Robertson plateau last year. I think if you bring in someone like Finn and Spavital as the offensive coordinator and pair them together, I like the Ashton Hawkins pickup. They're very familiar with them because they got beat at home by Texas State last year, a team that Sam, you and I are both really high on. But if Finn can kind of come in and elevate, along with Spavital, that offense to a new level, you get Aranda back in more. I do think they can improve. And there's also a little bit of, maybe Dave Aranda's coaching for his job this year, right? And so, will that desperation or will that pressure kind of help elevate them, or will they kind of sink under that? I'm interested to see.
Ain't no maybe about it. He is absolutely coaching for his job this year. I would say very important first half of the season coming up for Baylor. So I think they've got to start out of the gate quick. Now we're into round 5. We've got 4 picks left. We're down to round 5, pick number 13. I am up. This is my last pick of this draft. And I'm going to go with the team that Bruce just mentioned a while ago, BYU. This BYU had a tough go in the Big 12, their first round. 5-7, but this is a program that is not unfamiliar with success. They've went 11-1 in 2020, as you guys remember, when they had Zach Wilson. 10-3 after that, 8-5 the year after that. A little bit of a tough year to debut in the Big 12, but I'm intrigued by what they're doing at quarterback. They got a battle with Jake Retzloff and Gary Bohannon going on. Bohannon's a guy who we were just talking about Baylor. He was a starting quarterback on that Big 12 title team. So he ends up winning that job. That I'd be curious to see if he can rekindle some of that magic. He went to USF after he lost the job to Blake Shapen at Baylor, but he got injured toward the end of his time there and really went through a lot physically. So it sounds like he's healthy and he's ready to go. So I'm curious to see how good he can be if he ends up winning this job. Jay Hill, new DC there. It's the second year there after being at Weber State. They're going to need to be improved on that side of the ball, but they got 13 guys returning with 100 defensive snaps, so or more, and 7 of those were freshmen and sophomores. So I think BYU's got a ceiling, and as Bruce said, they've got good size, they got big dudes, and I'm still a believer in Kalani Sitake. I think he's a good coach. He's done a solid job there. Bruce, what's your read on BYU and how competitive they can be in the Big 12?
it's going to be interesting. Like I think Kalani's a good coach. I mean, when you're around him, he's a Kyle Whittingham guy, so you feel the physicality. I mean, I think there's an authenticity that people respond to. LJ Martin's a really good running back. I saw them, a bunch last year, and I talked to Kalani for a while this offseason. Retzlaff is from here in Southern California, and he was a really prolific quarterback, went to junior college, and he's talented. He kind of slings it around. I think he was pressed into action, and he has to take care of the football better. I know they like him, and he had a really good spring. Bohannon is a big, strong athlete who's obviously played a lot of football and has had some strong moments. I'm curious if it stays with Retzlaff, how much he grows from last year. I mean, he did some good things, but ultimately there were some key turnovers, and he looked like an inexperienced quarterback adjusting to the system. I do think with LJ Martin, they'll be able to run the football really well. Skill talent's not great at receiver, and I think that's going to be a challenge for anything if you're going to try to throw the football. But we're in this spot right now where I think, never mind winning the conference, I just think, can you get bowl eligible here? And I think a lot of that's going to come down to how much better the offense can be.
Justin, over under 4.5 win total for BYU. You think they got a good decent shot to get to a bowl this year?
Yeah, I mean, I have to pull up they feel like a 5-1 team. There's a couple of these teams kind of down in this bottom. So I guess I'd say over 4.5, but under making a bowl for BYU. I like Jay Hill. I think the defense is going to be better in year 2, but I think there might just be too many questions and maybe a slight talent disparity there in order to get to a bowl game.
Yeah, LJ Martin, El Paso, Texas product. Good ball player. Good kid coming out of high school. Justin, you're up next. Pick number 14 in the Big 12 Power Draft. Who you got?
So I don't think anyone will accuse me of this being a homer pick since we're down at 14. But I'm going to take the Bearcats, Cincinnati. I probably would have taken them a couple spots higher. There's a couple question marks with this team based off last year. What's interesting, though, is I talked to Scott Satterfield going into year 2 and the second season in the Big 12 for the program. Talked to him earlier this offseason. He made the point that after Luke Fickell's departure and the transition, that he probably should have made more changes to the roster. That they lost a bunch of pieces, they lost a bunch of talent, whether it's to the NFL or the transfer portal when Luke Fickell left. But I think the idea was this team just went to the playoff. They won 9 games in Luke Fickell's last year. Let's not try and change too much. Let's try and kind of keep the culture momentum. And Luke Fickell and Scott Satterfield are just two very different coaches. And so, I think that they address this offseason more in Scott Satterfield's style and approach. Whether that works, we'll see. But I think in their mind, they kind of cleaned house a little bit. They got in players that they felt fit their system a little bit more. They brought in a new defensive coordinator, Tyson Veit, who's the linebackers coach at Iowa State, which I thought was a really good hire. If you're going to, play defense in the Big 12, try and do what Iowa State has done over the past few years. The two biggest issues last season were quarterback play in the secondary. Emory Jones just did not work at quarterback. They went out and got Brennan Sorsby, who's a young transfer out of Indiana. They really like him. Kind of has a dual threat gunslinger type ability, which is what Scott Satterfield has liked over the course of his career. He comes into an offense that brings back their entire starting offensive line, and I think was 6th in the country in rushing last year. So for as bad as they were, they ran the ball well. Corey Kiner, 1,000-yard rusher, is back. They added Evan Pryor in the backfield from Ohio State. I think the offense, if Sorsby can just be average compared to what Emory Jones was last year, I think the offense has a chance to be good. Defensively, they totally rebuilt the secondary. They brought in some interesting transfers, some new pieces, but I still think that's where the biggest question marks are. Dante Corleone, the Godfather, All-American defensive tackle, is limited right now. They announced earlier this summer that he had blood clots in his that were found in his lungs, and so they were kind of bringing him back slowly. They're optimistic he's going to play this year, but that's their best defensive player, and he has not been able to go full go yet in fall camp. When and how he comes back, I think will have a big factor on them. But as much as they brought in those new pieces in the secondary, it's a new system, new defensive coordinator, a lot of new faces. I think there was 47 total new additions between freshmen and transfers this year. I'm a little bit concerned of the defense's ability to kind of catch up and play really well. But I think they're going to be better than last year, especially at the quarterback position.
It's interesting what you said about Satterfield's approach with kind of taking over with Fickell. I remember hearing that Dave Aranda did a similar thing when he took over after Matt Rule left, because he took over a really successful team that went to a Sugar Bowl, and they didn't want to change much, and then eventually found out that he was probably better off doing it his way, at least in terms of trying to build the team in his image. Steve Sarkisian probably in a different way, totally from the start decided to go with what he wanted to do, and they had to suffer through a really rough first year anyway. So I think honestly, probably the best approach from the start is just do what you got to do, without necessarily having to try to ease it so much from a transition standpoint from your predecessor. But we down to 2 picks left, picks 15 and 16. Bruce, you get the last 2 picks. I'm curious to see the order. We're down to Houston and Arizona State here at the bottom of the conference. I think 2 teams, admittedly, are probably going to have rough years. I'm curious which of these 2 teams you're higher on, Bruce. Who you got at number 15?
Oh man, I'm not. No. I'm going to talk Arizona State first.
Okay.
Cam Scatterbo, just because like I work with Mark Ingram every week. Mark Ingram's the biggest Cam Scatterbo fan in the country. Good news for Arizona State, Cam Scatterbo's in way better shape than he was last year. He's dropped like 20 pounds. I know I talked to him. He's a fun player to see. He's very versatile. Quarterback is going to be an interesting battle. The aforementioned Jeff Sims is now there competing with Sam Levitt, who had transferred from Michigan State. And I think the tricky part with Jeff Sims is like there's a lot of stuff you look at and be like, man, he looks like he's a heck of a player. And then in games, it just doesn't translate, or there's turnovers, or just it's a frustrating experience. Kenny Dillingham had some moments last year. His game against UCLA was one of the more creative game planning wins by any coach in college in football, probably last year, much less college football. But he's got to upgrade a lot from compared to what he took over. I mean, that was a program that was reeling from Herm Edwards. There's been a lot of talk this week about the Jim Harbaugh recruiting violation, the COVID dead period. I mean, Arizona State was way deep into that, and they're still reeling from that. So I think Kenny is a good fit there and get them going. I'd like to say if they can get to 4 wins or 5 wins, that's progress. That's big progress. The other part of it for Houston, at least you have a coach who has a really, really impressive track record of being a winner. You look at what Willie Fritz did at Tulane, and he got it going and was able to sustain it some. I don't think, he walks in from, and Sam, this better than I do, but just the instability around Houston football. I mean, there's been a lot of success in the last, dating back to when Bryles took it, and then Summy built off it. It's just, and then Dana had some good moments in there, but it's just been such a roller coaster ride, from Summy to then Tom Herman's in there, and then Major. And it's just such mercurial is not even a fair way to put it. So now you have hopefully some stability going in there. It's not to say that they don't have talent around, but you had some key guys jump in the portal, and they lost one of their best defensive linemen who ended up at CU. Really disruptive interior D lineman that I think they'll miss. I think you see, can the quarterback stay healthy? I think that's a big concern. I mean, again, I think he's a good hire. I just think that you're digging out of a hole. And I don't know how much stability is around it when you add like an athletic director overturn. I don't think that some of those things were, you already had instability with that athletic director, and then you punted on him. Now it's like, okay, we're rebuilding again.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky at Houston. I think both of these situations have to rebuild it in their own ways. Arizona State, obviously, as you mentioned, the stuff that happened with Edwards didn't leave Dillingham a great roster. So he's been heavy on transfers the first couple of years. I think they went 31 transfers last year, 29 this year. So they've been trying to rebuild that roster in a hurry. So I think you have to have some patience with that if you're Arizona State. At Houston, I think the ceiling there is really high with Fritz because of his track record, what he did at Tulane, what he did at the FCS level, what he's done at every level that he's coached. But it's going to take time. You look at his Tulane track record, they were not winning big right away. It was a very gradual build. I think that's going to happen here. That roster got raided a little bit. They lost Jamari Caldwell, who went to Oregon. You mentioned they lost some guys to Colorado. They lost Sam Brown, the receiver, to Miami. They lost some really key contributors. And this first year, I think, is going to be a little rough go for Houston. Justin, what is your feel on which of these two teams has the most upside in the short term?
I'd probably lean Arizona State. Just, Kenny Dillingham's been there longer and has a little bit more established. I think my outlook on both of these teams is I like both of those coaches. I think they're both going to struggle this year, but my longer term outlook for both programs are bullish and positive. I like Dillingham kind of dipping into Texas pretty hard, whether it's, high school recruiting or portal recruiting. I think that's smart, and I think they've done well there. And I like the way Fritz has, been a program builder over the course of his career. I just think in a conference that we've talked about is pretty deep and competitive. I think you're asking a lot of those two teams to be competitive this season.
I agree. So let's recap the order real quick on our draft. 1, Kansas State. 2, Utah. 3, Oklahoma State. 4, Iowa State. 5, Kansas. 6, Arizona. 7, West Virginia. 8, UCF. 9, Colorado. Texas Tech 10. TCU 11. Baylor 12. BYU 13. Cincinnati 14. And I guess we'll say Arizona State 15 and Houston 16. So that's our Big 12 order of draft. And now let's pick who we think is going to be in the conference championship game and who is going to win it at the end of the day. Bruce, I'll start with you. Who are your 2 Big 12 championship game teams, and who do you think will win the conference?
I am going to go with K-State and Utah, the teams I didn't have a chance to pick. And I will take Kansas State.
Okay, Kansas State over Utah. Justin, who do you got? 2 Big 12 conference title game participants and winner.
I have Iowa State winning the Big 12 over Kansas State, which would actually be a rematch.
Armageddon.
And a rematch of the final game of the regular season. So I think whoever wins that game, I think one of the teams going into that game is going to have to win to get to the title game. And then the other team, is going to get there anyways. But I really like Iowa State, for all the reasons that we talked about earlier in the pod. I just think they have a lot of interesting pieces coming back. And I understand I'm going out on a little bit of a limb there picking them, but I'm going with the Cyclones.
It's the Big 12. There are no limbs here unless you take ASU and Houston.
That's right. If anybody's picking Houston, if anybody gave Houston a first place vote, like somebody gave Vanderbilt a first place vote in the SEC poll, we'd have to do some investigation. I will take Kansas State over Oklahoma State. I think the Pokes bring so much back, and I think they're going to be in position to get back to the conference title game. I'm going to take K-State just because I think they're going to be a little bit more explosive offensively. And I'm really intrigued, like I said, about what Avery Johnson can do with that backfield. So I'm going to take the Wildcats to be your Big 12 champion over the Cowpokes. Guys, that was fun. I enjoyed it. What do we think? What do you think of your teams that you ended up with? Bruce, what do you think of what you got here? Bruce, you had Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Colorado, Texas Tech.
Yeah, I feel bad because I know that's like Houston is a school you have deep ties to, and I feel like the picking them at the bottom. I should have probably played to the home team and just picked Arizona last. But I think I felt good that I got some of the teams that I got in the second, third round, just because again I could see 10 or 11 teams winning this conference, so it's a crapshoot. I really feel like anything can happen, and that's what's the fun part about this league.
Justin, you got Utah, Kansas, UCF, TCU, and Cincinnati. How do you feel about that haul?
The Kansas one is the one I'm curious. I think that's if Jalen Daniels is healthy and plays the whole season, I'm eating free steak, and if not, then I could be in a little trouble. So we'll see.
Good stuff, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you all for listening to Until Saturday. We appreciate you checking out the Big 12 preview. Follow the podcast feed on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave us a 5-star review on those podcast platforms. It helps us tremendously. We're on the road to 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, so please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. The link to the YouTube channel, the Until Saturday newsletter, which is penned by Jana Bardall, and any stories referenced on today's show can be found in the show's description. You can also leave us a voicemail on our Until Saturday phone line at 316-462-9852. Leave us your thoughts. We'll be back on Friday, and be sure to read the Freaks List.